Okay, hi everybody. My name is Judith White and I am the coordinator of the Aboriginal Ranger Programme for the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. And I'd like to welcome you all to this grant writing skills workshop. And we are really pleased that you could join us today. Just note, as you can see, that this session will be recorded and will be made available to the public afterwards on our website. I just wanted to start before we go any further that we want to acknowledge all the traditional owners of the lands and waters across the state on which we meet today, including the Whadjuk people on the land we are hosting this meeting. We also pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. DBCA acknowledges Aboriginal people as the traditional owners of the lands and waters it manages, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. Okay, so we are offering you this webinar today because the Aboriginal Ranger Programme aims to assist Aboriginal organisations and communities to build their capacity to deliver ranger programs and to manage country. With engagement with the ARP reference group has communicated to DBCA that this includes a need to provide more support in the project planning and grant writing phases, particularly for new and emerging groups. This webinar is our first trial of providing support for the upskilling of grant writing, and we are really pleased to welcome Tara Whitney from Whitney Consulting to provide this webinar for you. Tara brings extensive experience in assessing applications and in training assessors and has unique understanding of what government is looking for. We really hope that you find this session useful. As you are aware, round 5 is currently open and we have to ensure the integrity of the EOI process that is maintained and that probity principles are adhered to during the competitive allocation process. These probity principles are set out in the round 5 probity guidelines, which are available on our website. DBCA has also engaged an independent probity auditor to oversee the EOI process. What this means for us today is that we wish to ensure transparency and that all applicants are treated fairly and equitably in the access to information and advice that may impact their application. I am the project lead for round 5 and I am also one of the assessors. So my role is to monitor the application of these probity principles and to minimise any risk of potential competitive advantage, conflict of interest or bias. For these reasons, we engaged Tara as an independent expert to conduct this webinar for you today. The webinar will be focused on grant writing skills in general and not particularly in the context of the Aboriginal Ranger Programme. Tara won't be able to advise you on your specific project and content of your applications. I will also not be staying for the rest of this webinar to take questions. Any inquiries related to round 5 need to follow the inquiries protocols set out by our probity auditor. So if during this course some questions about the process or clarifications on the criteria come to mind in relation to your application for round 5, we ask you to please note them down and write to us afterwards and we'll be happy to help you. You can email the inquiries to, all one word, Aboriginal Ranger Programme at dbca.wa.gov.au. Answers to inquiries that are general in nature and that could help clarify aspects of the process for all applicants are periodically posted as addendums on our website, and we encourage all of you to regularly check our website while the EOI is open to see if there's addendums posted there. There is currently one posted there. If you wish to discuss your particular circumstances and your project, we advise that you reach out to our staff in our regional offices who have knowledge of the local area and experience in developing work plans in the first instance. So we hope that you get a lot out of this session today. And we will be sending out some feedback forms afterwards because we wish to learn what was most helpful and also to get some insight into what we can think about in the future if we provide similar opportunities. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to Tara now to start the webinar, and thank you again for participating in the session today.
Great, thanks Judith. Hi everyone, welcome. I will jump straight into it. My name is Tara Whitney. I run Whitney Consulting. So our company writes grants, tenders and business cases, and we have a lot of experience with grants, having secured over $80 million in funding for our clients in the past 5 years. And also, as Judith mentioned, I have spent about 7 years for the Department of Regional Development at the time, assessing grant applications through the Royalties for Regions program. So I've been a past grants assessor and know what it is government is looking for. Throughout this workshop, we will cover grants generally, as Judith was mentioning. If you do have any questions, I have muted everyone just so that there's no background noise and you can hear me. But if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask, or there will be time at the end if you are, if you have questions and you want to leave it to the end, that's not a problem at all. No stress, Adele. If you're jumping in and out, I'll just keep admitting people if they come in. All right. The content of the workshop, we're just going to cover a bit about what grants are, what they are for, what they are, how you can plan your project to best position yourself to get grant funding, grant criteria, the grant writing approach, and then we'll talk about reporting and acquittal. In terms of grants, be aware that, as Judith said, this is a generic grant writing course. So I want to give you the information to enable you to apply for any grant program, not just the Aboriginal Ranger Program. So this course will help you to understand what grants are and a general grant writing process. Grants are for a project. So they are for something that has a beginning and an end, and you deliver something. It has outcomes, or it has benefits that you deliver. So grant funding is not generally for the ongoing management of an organisation forever and a day. It's not going to pay your utilities and your staff forever. It is for a project. So it might be for a 3-year period to do this particular thing, or for 6 months to do this particular thing. So it's for a specific project with a beginning and an end and a clear benefits and outcomes. So when you are thinking about grants, you do need to be aware that they're not free money. So grants are not money that you can just take and do with what you like. Grants are paying for you to do something. They're paying for you to deliver something for the benefits, and you must know exactly what it is you are delivering and what it is your benefits are going to be. Because the reason that funding bodies give away money, and we call people that provide grants funding bodies, the reason funding bodies give money away and they give grants away is because they're paying for something. They're investing in something. So they are paying for you to do what you are doing. So it's not free money. There is work involved. You do have to make sure you do what you've said you're going to do, and you do have to make sure you report on what you're doing and keep them involved, because they're not just giving you money and walking away. They're giving you money for a specific purpose. With grant programs nowadays, usually they are in a portal. So normally you have to do your grant application through an online portal like Smarty Grants. And for that, you do need to set up an account, and you need to give yourself time to upload all of the information and submit it. I always recommend you don't leave it to the last minute. Make sure you set your deadline as the day before the actual deadline, because you don't want to be going in and uploading your application and trying to submit it all in the last minute and then have some kind of a technical glitch or an internet breakdown or something like that. So please don't leave it to the last minute. Set your account up now and get ready, and make sure that you submit it the day before at the very least. Grants are provided, as I said, by funding bodies, and they are provided for a reason. Now, with government, it's fairly easy to understand why they're giving away money, but all funding bodies have their different reasons. So, for example, if you're applying for some funding to do a youth sporting program, if you're applying for that money through state government, so through the Department of Local Government, local cultural industry, sporting, the old sport and rec department. If you're applying for the money through them, then you know that that's their job. That's their job, is to get people to play sport. So government is obviously going to give away money for a sporting program because that's their remit. However, there are also other funding bodies like banks, mining companies, other organisations that give away money. And you must think about, why are they giving away grants? Why are they doing this? So if they are giving away money for a sporting program, so say, for example, a CBH or some mining company decides they're going to put out a grant for a sporting program for youth, why are they doing that? They're not doing it because they desperately want people to play sport. That's not their remit. That's not their job. That's not their role. So start to think about why, because that will help you with your grant application. The reason they are doing it is because most people don't like banks and most people don't like mining companies. So they want you to like them. So it's all about PR. It's all about good relations. What that means for your grant writing is it means that you know why they're giving away the money, so you can put something in there. So for example, in your application, yes, you'll talk all about how you're going to deliver this great youth sporting program, but you might also say, we invite you to come down and have a photo with all of the kids, and we're going to put it on our Facebook and our newsletter, and we've got 300 followers, and we're going to name it the Bank West Sports Day or whatever it is, to give them what they're paying for, because they're paying for the PR. Whereas with government, they're paying for the actual outcomes. If they say that they want to pay for a sporting program to increase participation in sport, that's their job. That's why they're doing it. So you need to make sure you're showing them exactly how you're giving them what they are paying for. In terms of finding grants, people can find it really difficult to know what grants are available, what's out there, and what might be suitable for them. I will just quickly say, this is something you should probably do a little bit of work to set yourself up so that you're not finding out about the grant the day before it's due or the day after it closed. There are a few places you can find out about grants. Obviously, I'm going to mention the professional grant writing companies because that's what we do. We have social media pages that you can like, but we also have a newsletter that goes out once a month that says, here are all the grants that are open and here are all the grants that are coming up. So you can sign up to our newsletter on our website, and that email comes straight to your inbox, and you get the email to say these are all the grants that are around. There may be other grant writing companies that do the same thing. So have a look around and go to their websites. You can sign up to their newsletter and you can get that information straight away. Another place to find out about grants is local or sector organisation mailing lists. So forgive me, I will use the Wheatbelt as an example because that's where I was based when I started the business, and that's where most of my staff are still. So what I mean by local mailing lists is, for example, the Wheatbelt Development Commission or Regional Development Australia Wheatbelt or Wheatbelt NRM. So these are organisations that are based on location. So they will tell you in their newsletters all about the grants that are available for the Wheatbelt. So you might want to sign up to their mailing list and then you'll get that information. What I mean by sector mailing lists is whatever sector you are in. So if you are searching for grants in the natural resource management area, in the NRM sector, then you would sign up for NRM mailing lists. So have a look at the organisations that you deal with and that maybe your peak bodies or anything like that you deal with, and see whether there's a mailing list that you can sign up for to get that information directly from them. The next is social media. So going and liking the social media pages for DBCA, for if you're in the regions, for Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, for professional grant writing companies, for anyone that you know provides grants so that you can be kept up to date. And with government websites, the federal government is really handy. They have what's called Grant Connect, and that is www.grants.gov.au, so grants.gov.au. And that Grant Connect is one that you can sign up and set your keywords. So you can tell them you're interested in all grants that are eligible, that are relevant to WA, or you can put keywords in there. So it has to have certain, words in it, like sport or something like that. And then it will send you an email that says these are all the grants that are open, these are the ones that are coming up, and it will continue to send you those emails anytime that you have a match. So you set your profile, it comes through, and that covers all federal government grants, so it's really easy. State government is a little bit less combined, so you go to the individual departments, so like DBCA, and find out what mailing list they have and sign up for that. And you may also want to check their websites because they may have that information on there. So think about which state government departments are relevant for you and go and have a look. Local government, just go directly to your local government and ask them what grants they have available, or on their website they may say. So what to do before you start writing your grant application. The absolute key for grant applications and making them easy for you to write is having done the planning ahead of time. If you start to try to write a grant application before you've done the project planning, it will be really hard for you because you won't be able to answer the questions and you'll really struggle. So I really encourage you to plan your project first. So I have sent through to DBCA a couple of handouts for this grant workshop. I'm not sure if they've been emailed to you as yet, or if they haven't, they will be. The handouts include a project plan template. So you may want to use that template to help you to plan your project. It's just something to give you a guide to help you plan it. What I mean by planning your project is you need to define what your project is for starters. So remember I said a project has a beginning and an end, and you deliver something, you do something. So what exactly is it you are going to do? Are you going to engage a consultant to write up a business plan? Are you going to build something? Are you going to deliver a program? What is it exactly you are going to do? And get the details of that, the project scope. What are we going to do? When you know what you're going to do, then you need to think about, okay, well, how are we going to do this? Are we going to do all the work ourselves? Are we going to get somebody else to do it? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Let's step out the tasks. Once we've got the money, what do we need to do? And how much is that going to cost? So are we going, you might need to go and get some quotes, somehow estimate exactly how much it's going to cost to do all the things that you're going to do. So project planning means looking at what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? The project plan should help you with that. The next thing that you need to do is you need to gather all of your evidence and attachments. So there's a few things you always need for a grant application. You always need to know your ABN, and you might need an incorporation certificate. You might need financials if you're an existing organisation. So gather all of those sorts of things that you would need. But the other things that you need is you need that project planning evidence. So a really key factor to remember when you're writing a grant application is the assessors want you to evidence everything that you claim. So if you make a claim in your application, they want proof of that. They want evidence of that. So for example, if I claim it's going to cost me $70,000 to do my project, they want evidence of that. So they would want quotes to be attached that say, look, here you go, it's going to cost this amount for this and this amount, and added up together, that all equals $70,000. So I'm not just claiming it's a $70,000 project, I'm evidencing that by attaching quotes. So anything that you claim, you should try to evidence through attachments or through your answers in your application. So you might want, some of the things you might want to gather are, as I said, quotes. You might want to get some photos. So you might, if you're claiming that your land is it has a particular nature, you might have a report that talks about the fact that the soil in your land has got these issues, or that would be evidence for that claim. You might need photos to show that your particular the infrastructure that you have needs refurbishing, it needs to be redeveloped. So you'll take photos of the old infrastructure to evidence that. Any support letters, you might claim that your local shire is really on board and they think this project's great. Get a letter of support to evidence that they think it's great. Any publications and reports, like I said, if there's any, if you're trying to do a tourism project in your area, and there happens to be a report by your local, your Development Commission or RDA or the Shire, a report about economic development that says that tourism is extremely important for your region and it's going to be a growth industry or something like that, any publication that evidences the fact that tourism is really important because you're saying that you're going to do a project to build tourism. So have a think about what you can gather to evidence your claims and gather that information before you start, because that will help you to write your application as well. The next thing you need before you start writing your application is the grant guidelines. So every grant program will have a set of guidelines. They could be really simple. So grants vary quite significantly in their size and their complexity. So some grants are really simple. They just fill out an online form and it doesn't take you very long at all. Usually that's because you're only applying for $500 or $1,000, $2,000. Some grants are really complex and they have really long guidelines, and usually that's because you're applying for more money. So the key here is to know that there are guidelines for all grant applications. They differ depending on how much. So some of them might just be a simple web page, others might be pages and pages of information in the guidelines that you need to read through. But the first thing you do need to do is read through those guidelines. If you don't understand anything in the guidelines, you can always contact the funding body and ask them to clarify it for you. But you really need to know the guidelines and know them well, because the guidelines set up everything that you need to know for your application. The first thing they do is they tell you about the eligibility. So if you're not eligible for that grant, you don't want to waste your time applying, putting all this effort in. So you've got to check your eligibility in the guidelines, make sure you can apply before you start. The next thing that the guidelines talk about is they tell you why the funding body is giving away the money. And I'll talk about that again and again. The funding body is paying for something. The guidelines will tell you what they're paying for and why they're paying for it. Highlight all of this information, anything really important. So highlight where it says, and often the way they will use, the terminology they will say the grant objectives or the intended outcomes. That's the wording they tend to use. The intended outcomes of this grant program are, or the key objectives of this grant program are. Highlight those because they are really important. And one thing that I always do is I use their wording back to them. So for example, if the grant guidelines say the intended outcomes of this grant are to increase participation in sport, my application will say this project will increase participation in sport by doing something or other. So I repeat their wording back to them. So it's very clear to the assessor how my project is going to do what they are paying for, because that is absolute key to getting grant funding. So in those guidelines, highlight where it says what the key objectives of the grant are, what the intended outcomes of the grant are. The other thing to highlight in those grant guidelines is anything it tells you to do or any limitations or rules, etc. So it might be that they say you can attach anything you want, but it has to be a maximum of 2 megabytes. So highlight that so that you can make sure that all of your attachments are smaller than 2 megabytes. Or it might say you're allowed to attach up to 10 pages of documents. So you don't want to attach 20 pages and then get kicked out and not eligible because you've attached too much. So highlight anything it tells you to do. Often it will also tell you what eligible budget items are. So it might say to you, you're not allowed to spend money on staff, or you're not allowed to spend money on land or equipment. Make sure you're aware of that before you start writing your application. Quick horror story for you was with COVID happening, there was a grant that existed before COVID and it continued on after COVID. They didn't change the application form, they just changed the grant guidelines. In the grant application form, it just says attach your documents or to supporting documents here, that's all it said. In the guidelines, it said to be eligible, you must attach a COVID safe plan. You can imagine how many people did not attach a COVID safe plan because the application form didn't have attach your COVID safe plan here. It just said attach documents. But the guidelines said you weren't eligible if you didn't attach a COVID safe plan. So many people did all of the work of writing an entire grant application and then weren't eligible just because they didn't attach a COVID safe plan, which they probably had anyway. So please be very careful about reading and rereading those guidelines for your application. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the criteria. So all grants have two sets of criteria that you need to know about. The first is eligibility criteria, and the second is either assessment or selection criteria, depending on what they want to call it. Eligibility criteria is very straightforward. You are either eligible or you are not. Don't try to trick or get through it. Don't think that you can explain your way through eligibility, because they won't read your application if you're not eligible. If you think you should be eligible or you just want to check, contact the funding body. Before you start writing and try to explain away something, contact the funding body, because they may turn around and say, oh no, that's acceptable, just tick this. Or they may say, no, I'm sorry, you're not eligible, don't bother wasting your time applying. It's really important that you contact your funding body if you're not sure about eligibility, because you don't want to waste your time. Eligibility centres on three things usually. One is the organisation, the entity type. So it might be that only not-for-profits can apply or only local governments can apply. So what kind of an entity you are, whether you're a business, etc., that has an impact on whether you are eligible. The next is the project, so what it is you're doing. So if you are applying for a sporting grant, there's no point if you are an arts project or a tourism project, you're not going to get funded. So you can't be eligible for that grant program if it's a completely different project theme. The next is location. So sometimes it might be only regional areas, it might be all of Australia, it might be just this local government that can apply. So location impacts on your eligibility as well. The assessment or selection criteria, these are the ones that are scored. So you will get scored against these questions, and sometimes they are specific questions, like they might be 3 assessment criteria questions that they score you against, or sometimes the whole application forms the selection criteria and assessment criteria. But where you are asked to write your answers and give text answers and put in a bit of writing, you must answer these to be scored well. To do this, the process is to make sure that you are answering the question using not motherhood statements. And what I mean by motherhood statements is, so it's the same as a job interview. If you're going for a job interview, you'll often get told, don't use motherhood statements, actually give us information. So what that means is, for example, we'll use an Aboriginal Ranger Programme example question. One of the questions they ask is about the capacity to deliver, so your ability to deliver the project. And they would say things like, describe how the applicant might deliver the project. And one of the headings under that is training and capacity building. So you can't just say in your response to that, oh, we will train all our rangers and we will build their capacity. Because that's a motherhood statement. That's just a catch-all statement. You're giving no detail, no information, no examples. We don't understand exactly what you are doing. Another one is staff and resources. You can't say, look, we are definitely able to deliver this project because we have brilliant staff. That's a motherhood statement. Everybody thinks they have brilliant staff. Everybody thinks they're capable of delivering the project, but there's no specifics, no detail. The way you need to answer that question is by giving us detail. So think about giving us their qualifications. Our staff are fantastic because all our staff are qualified in X, Y, or Z, or all our staff have at least 5 years of this experience, or list your particular staff. And this, Bob has 5 years experience doing this, he's qualified in this, past projects he's worked on include this particular project in 2017. Give us the information. It doesn't matter what that is. For some grants, they're a lot more lenient on, and especially for the Aboriginal Ranger Program, for the small grants, they don't require you necessarily to have whole bunch of experience and a whole bunch of qualifications, that's okay. You just need to give us something. So explain to us why you're capable. You know, it could be life experience. It could be because of your, you know, of things that you've been involved in. You don't necessarily have to have done this exact thing. You just need to tell us why you believe you're capable. Give us some information, give us some specifics. So I like to say SAO answers, and what that means is situation, action, outcome. So to give us the evidence that you are capable, set the situation. In 2017, I managed a project doing such and such. The project value was X dollars, and the outcome was we successfully delivered the project. That gives me evidence. That proves that my staff, who I'm saying are going to be capable of delivering this project, gives me the evidence to show that they are capable. So as an assessor, I've got details, specifics, and I've got proof, so I can score them highly. So does that make sense by what I mean about how to answer assessment or selection criteria? Not using those motherhood statements, giving actual specifics, details, giving an example, referring to an attachment. So it might be that you've got an attachment that perfectly explains the answer and evidences the answer. You can refer to that in your response. Say, as per attachment A, this project is needed because the soil is whatever it is and it needs to be, needs to be fixed. Whatever it is, give the explanation, give the detail, give the evidence. Does that make sense to everyone? All good? Remember here to treat each question the same. So it may be, you've got to answer every question. So it may be that some of the questions seem repetitive in a grant application. Many applications are repetitive. You still need to answer every question because it may be that they are scoring each question. So you can't just assume, oh, well, I've answered that already, so I don't need to say anything. Refer back to, so you might need to say, as per the response to question 3, and then go on. But please make sure you answer every question. If you speak to 100 assessors of grants and you ask them what is the #1 reason people don't get the funding, every single one of those 100 assessors would say they don't answer the question. It is absolutely the most important thing. If you take away only one thing from this workshop, take away this: answer the question that is asked. Make sure you have answered it. Read the question, answer it, then go back and read the question again and read your response and make sure you have answered it and answered each part of the question. If it's got a couple of parts in the question, make sure you've answered each part of that question. Even if your response isn't, you don't think that maybe it's very strong, you still need to answer it. So even if you've been asked, do you have experience in delivering a project like this, and you don't, you can say that. Although we don't have experience delivering this exact kind of project, I have managed my own business in the past and therefore have all of these skills. My business was successful. This is what it did. So even though you might not be able to answer it the way you think they want, give the best answer you can give. So the grant writing approach. So as I mentioned, every grant is different in terms of size and complexity, in terms of how they ask the questions, what they ask. But there is the same grant writing approach no matter what the grant is. And this is this generic grant writing approach that I'll go through with you that will help you to write any application. What changes is the level of detail you need to put into your application. If you're only going for a small amount of money, if it's a small grant round rather than a larger one, you won't have to put in as much detail. It won't have to be as polished as if you're going for a larger amount of money. But the approach is the same. The basics are the same. So what that approach is that there are 2 key areas you need to address in your application if you're going to get the funding. The first is you need to show the funding body how you're going to give them what they're paying for, which I've talked about a few times already, and I'll talk about again because it is the absolute key to getting the money. Your funding body is paying for something. They are giving the grant money to you in return for something. What they want in return needs to be what their program is paying for. So they have an intention. There is no point, if the grant funding body is paying for apples, there is no point offering them oranges. You've got to show that you're offering apples. Otherwise, they're not going to buy it. So show the funding body how you're giving them what they're paying for. We do that, as I said, by aligning our project and what we're going to deliver to what they have said in the guidelines is their intended outcomes, their intended aims, their intended objectives, whichever term they use. The second thing that you need to address in your application is you need to prove that you're not going to waste their money. So you may have an amazing project that is completely aligned to why they're giving away the money. But if you are an organisation that has never managed to deliver a project to budget, that has had lots of issues with fraud and people taking the money, or if this project is clearly going to cost at least $1 million to deliver, and you say you only need $100,000 to deliver it. In any of these scenarios, as you can see, there's no assurity that if we give you the money, you're going to do the project. You could just waste it. If we give you that $100,000, there's no way you're going to finish the project. You're going to get part way through and not be able to finish because it's clearly a project that's going to cost $1 million to deliver. So you've got to make sure you prove you're not going to waste their money. You've got to prove that your budget is accurate, that you've got to prove that you're capable. You are the kind of organisation that is able to do and able to deliver the project. If you have a look through any grant application, you'll see how every question is aligned to one of these two key areas. Now, as I said though, so the way to address these two key areas is what I call key project questions. We need to address these key project questions. I'm going to go through each of these key project questions with you, but I will again reiterate that the first thing you have to do is answer the actual question they are asking you. That's why one of the handouts I've given you is a checklist, a grant application checklist, because what I want you to do is read the question they've asked, write your response, then have a look at the checklist and see whether you've addressed these key project questions as well. And if you haven't, you can go back and put that information into your application. So make sure you answer the question that is asked first, and then you need to make sure you've answered these 6 key project questions, which we will go through. So the first of these 6 key project questions is why, and this is the most important question. Because why is about why the project is needed, and that is about why they need to give money out. Why do you need the project? So you've got to talk about, look, you know, my project is absolutely needed for all of these reasons. If there is no need for your project, then you will not get the money. Nobody is going to pay for something that's not needed. In order to answer this question, you need to assume that the assessor knows nothing about you. They know nothing about your organisation, your location, your problem, your situation, and you need to explain it to them. You need to explain what the problem is. So there's got to be some kind of a problem that you're going to fix by doing this project. There's got to be a need. Why is the project needed? Tell them that story. So define the problem, tell them the story. So what that means is, if you are in an area that has a lot of children and no playgrounds, you can clearly see that there is a problem. You've got all these children, but they're not being developed. They've got nothing to do. They're bored. They're going to not develop their skills. They're not going to develop mentally and physically. All of this is a problem. And you can see, therefore, that there is a need for this project. However, if you're in an area that has no children and heaps of playgrounds, you don't need money to build a playground. So no one's going to give you that money. So you've got to make sure you evidence that there is a need for your project. To give you an example of how this wasn't done so well, I once had one which was a netball court. So the applicant really clearly explained why they needed a netball court. They did a good job of that. They showed that they had a whole bunch of netball players. They had all these people wanting to play netball, and there was no netball court. Fabulous. Great information. That definitely means you need a netball court. So as an assessor, I was happy to go, yep, you need a netball court. However, their project was to build an indoor netball stadium. Now that costs a lot more money than just an outdoor netball court. And they had not explained why that was necessary. Why do we need a massive stadium indoors? Why can't we just have an outdoor netball court? So when I went back and asked them that question, the response was that they lived in a particular town in, up north in WA, and it was 50-something degrees in the middle of the day, and it never got below 40 degrees or whatever it was in summer. You cannot possibly play netball outdoors or play anything outdoors in that heat. You couldn't have asked, the part of it was to use for school. You would not be allowed to get school children to go outdoors and play in that kind of heat. It had to be indoors, or no one was ever going to use this particular netball court. But they hadn't told me that. So here I was, an assessor sitting in Perth, did not know their town, had no idea what it was like, and they hadn't explained it to me. So you can see here how you need to explain your town, you need to explain your situation, explain your problem clearly so that the assessor knows it. So why does your land need a particular thing? What is your situation? Explain the situation, define the problem, make it clear, and then show me that we need this project. Even if they don't ask, so some grant applications will just say, describe your project, and they don't actually ask why is your project needed. Even if that is the case, you do still need to address this question, because as I said, if the project's not needed, you're not going to get the money. So the why is about all of that. It's also about the deliverables of your project. So this is just some terminology that will often be used. They might talk about deliverables of your project, outputs, outcomes. What that means is deliverables is just what is your project going to deliver. So as we spoke about, your project is doing something, it's achieving something, it's delivering something. The what is the output. So an output is the actual thing you will deliver. So if I'm building a hospital as my project, the output is the hospital, the actual what, the thing. Or if I'm writing a report, the output is the report. The outcomes are the benefits. So they're the reason you do the what. The reason you build the hospital is improved health outcomes. So the output is the hospital, the outcome is the improved health outcomes, improved health. So that's the difference between outputs and outcomes. The outcomes are the benefits. Those are the things that the why, they're the reason you're doing the project. They're the reason the grant funding is being given to you. And you do need to make sure that you know exactly what it is you're going to deliver and what outcomes you're going to deliver. There we go. The next of those 6 key project questions is the what. So what is exactly what will your project do? So often when people write a grant application, they talk a lot about how great it's going to be wonderful, but they're not clear exactly what they're going to do. So it may be as simple as, we are going to engage a consultant to prepare a business plan for our Aboriginal Ranger Program. That may be the what, but you need to say that somewhere. You just need to be clear somewhere so that the assessor knows exactly what it is you're proposing to do. Give enough detail and answer obvious questions. What I mean by that is, if you're telling me that you're going to build a playground, one of the obvious questions somebody's going to ask is, where are you going to build it? On what land? What ages is it going to be for? Is it going to be for 0 to 3-year-olds, or is it going to be for teenagers? These are all obvious questions that you would ask anyone if they told you they're building a playground. So have a think about the obvious questions somebody might ask about your actual project, and put that information in there. Give enough detail so that they can understand exactly what you are doing. The next of the project questions is how. And this is made up of a couple of things. So one is the project implementation. What that means is just how will you deliver your project? So what are you going to do? Are you going to manage your project, or are you going to engage a consultant to do the work? You know, what's going to happen there? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? As I said, if you're saying, you know, you've got a project manager, you want to prove their project management ability, because we need to show the assessor you're capable of doing this project. Especially for the small grants for the Aboriginal Ranger Program, it's okay if you don't have past experience. But if you do, make sure you tell us about it. Make sure you brag about it to the assessor and show that this is your experience, this is your capability. And everybody has past experience and past qualifications and capabilities, even if they're not necessarily strictly exactly like this one. Just tell us, you know, you've been involved in such and such a corporation or organisation, you've been on a working group, or whatever it is you've been involved in, so that we know, the assessor knows that you are capable of managing this project. So project implementation is all about, you know, who's going to do it? Are you going to engage someone to do something? Are you going to do it? How's it all going to work? How will you deliver the project? If you're engaging a consultant as well, tell us about their experience. If you're going to engage a consultant to do the project, they would have expertise and past experience. Tell us what they're going to do and what their experience is. With the Aboriginal Ranger Program, just to note that there is small grants and there's large grants. So you don't, with the smaller grants, you obviously don't need all the details of how you're going to run the Ranger Program yet, because that's not the point. The point of the small grants is to help you work towards developing that Ranger Program. You just need to provide detail of what you're going to do in this point, what you're planning to get to, what point you're going to get to, and how you're going to get there. The next part of the how is the governance structure. So that's about who's checking and overseeing and making sure that the project's being delivered. So you might be the project manager, and you might have a board or a committee that you're working with, just giving us that information as to how that works. So again, the level and how it needs to work really depends on the amount of funding you're going for. So if you're going for millions of dollars, of course we would expect there to be steering committees or working groups. But for a small amount of money, especially for a small grant, none of that is expected. We just want to know as an assessor how it's going to be managed. So to give you an example, I was dealing with a sporting club out in the regions, and they were just going for a small amount of money. And I asked them, well, how is it going to be managed and who's going to govern it? And they just had no idea what I was talking about. So I said, well, okay, you're the project manager. Who are you going to talk to about the project? Who's going to check and make sure that you've done the project on time and that you've spent the money correctly, you haven't wasted the money? And who's going to check on you? And he said, well, I tell my president, the president of the sporting club. I said, great, you know, how often do you talk to him about the project? He said, oh, well, I see Fred every Friday at the pub. I said, okay, so every week you're talking to your president about the project. So put that information in the application. Probably don't talk about the pub, but put in the application to say that you're providing your president with a weekly project status update. You're advising him about the project weekly, and he is overseeing and making sure that you're spending the money to budget, to time, to scope. That's the kind of level of detail if you're going for small grants, versus obviously if you're going for much larger grants, needing a bit more structure. The other part of how is the procurement strategy. So this is just how are you going to buy things? How are you going to spend the money? So if you're given the grant funding, obviously the grant funding body expects you to spend that money wisely and to get value for money. So what they want to know is that if they give you $50,000 to get a business plan done, for example, they want to know that you're not just going to go and hire your brother or cousin or friend or whoever it is and pay them $50,000. But if that friend was going to do it for anybody else, they would have only charged them $20,000. So it's not correct. It's fraud. It's not spending the money appropriately. They want to know that you're going to maybe get 3 quotes for anything over $10,000. They just want to know that there is some kind of transparency to make sure that you're getting value for money. So that can be as simple as, for any project item that costs more than $2,000, we'll get at least 2 written quotes. It can be as simple as that. Just wanting to know that you're going to get value for money. So how are you going to decide who you're going to spend the money on? The next question is when. Now, with the Aboriginal Ranger Program, especially the small grants, I think it just says project start date and project end date. So you just need to know when you're starting and when you're finishing. And they will help you work through the actual milestones when you get the funding. But generally with grants, they often ask you for milestones or timeframes, and start and end date is a minimum. With your working out your timeframes, don't forget the assessment time for the grant. So don't say that you're going to start the project in September if the grant closes at the end of August, because you need at least 3 months, usually longer, but at least give it 3 months for government grants time frame for them to actually assess your application. So don't say you're going to start it any earlier. Usually with grants, you can't start until you know that you're getting the money. So if you do start your project before you get told you're getting the money, you're not getting the money that you've spent back. That's called being retrospective. Usually grants are not retrospective. So you have to wait till you get told you're getting the money before you can start your project. So set your start date at least 3 months to give them time for assessment. When you're doing that, I like to say, give it specific dates and specific activities, because when you're looking at the timeframes, we need to sort of understand, okay, I'm going to start landscaping on this date, on the 1st of July, and then I'm going to finish landscaping on the 31st of August. So it's really clear then for the assessor how long landscaping is taking you, to how long that component of your project is going to take. Just makes it really clear for the assessor what is happening through your project. So set the tasks out very clearly. Now, this is all best practice. It's best practice to have this detail. So if you've got this information, if you've got milestone information, you know exactly what you're doing, put the information in there. With the Aboriginal Ranger Program, especially the small grants, don't worry if you don't have the information, just put in what you do have. We're just talking best practice so you know exactly what would be the best thing that you could do. The next question on the key project questions is viability. Now that just means, is your project actually going to work? Prove to the assessor that you can actually deliver your project. That's done in a few ways. One is stakeholder engagement. So making sure the right people are on board. So if you're using anybody's land, that they need to be approving of it. If you need anyone to deliver your project, that they approve of it. You know, with the Aboriginal Ranger Program, obviously there's additional things about traditional owners, making sure they are aware of it. So you need to evidence that in your application, because if you haven't engaged with the stakeholders, then it may not be a viable project. So if I need somebody, if I need to have approval from someone to do this and I don't have their approval, then what's the point in giving me the money? Because I might not be able to do the project. If they say no, the project's dead. So you've got to make sure that you have engaged with anyone that you need. So with stakeholder engagement, I like to ask myself 2 questions. 1, who do I need to do the project? Is there anyone I need? Do I need approvals? Do I need money from somebody? Do I need anything from anyone? So who do I need to deliver the project? The second question is, who will benefit from the project, or who will use the project? Anyone that will use the project or benefit from it, you need to engage with them as well, because if they're going to be the users or the beneficiaries, you need to make sure the project meets their needs. So for example, there is no point building a playground and then finding out that no kids are using this playground because there's no shade sail and the playground itself is so hot in the sun that it's burning the kids. So no one's using it. Because if the users are not using it, you're not delivering the outcomes. The whole point of building a playground is for kids to use it, to get physical health benefits and mental health benefits. And if they're not using it, none of those benefits are being delivered. And that's what your grant money was for. Your grant was paid for those benefits. So if they're not using it, you're not doing your job, you haven't done your job, you haven't delivered the benefits. So you've got to make sure anyone that's going to benefit is on board as well. And evidence that if you can. You need to get attachments, letters of support to evidence that the stakeholders are on board. The next part about sustainability, about viability, is the sustainability aspect. So what that means is how the benefits will continue once the project finishes. So with most grant programs, they're for a certain amount of time. So as we said, projects have a start and end date. Grants are for projects. So there is an end date. So what is your plan for when the grant funding stops? How are you going to make sure your benefits continue after the project? What is your plan? What is your intention? With the Aboriginal Ranger Program, I understand it's for 3 years, and then you have to apply all over again. So is there something you're going to be looking into? You've got no guarantee of funding after 3 years. So are you going to be doing something over those 3 years to try to source other funding to help the program continue? Or, what are you going to do? What is your plan for sustainability? As I said again, this is best practice. It doesn't necessarily have to be in there, especially for the small grants, but start thinking about the long-term plan to fund your project after the grant runs out. The next part of viability is the risk analysis. With really big grants, there's a lot more involved. You've got to do a whole big thing with risk. But for smaller grants, I'll just say, remember that when you're doing a risk, when you're asked to identify risks, it's not just about the risk to delivering your project. So it's not just about, the project might be impeded by weather, or we might run out of money, or not just those risks. It's about the risk to delivering the outcomes, because as we said, the whole purpose of giving out the grant money is to deliver those benefits. So any risk to those benefits is a risk that should be considered in your risk section. So for the playground example, that would have been one that should have been included in their risk assessment. It should have been nobody uses the playground, or not enough people use the playground to deliver the benefits. So think about the risk after the project's finished, and when the actual thing that you're doing is being implemented, the program's being run, risk to delivering the actual outcomes. So the next of the key project questions is about cost. So cost is related to the budget, obviously. With your budgets, I will say you need to provide reasonable detail. So with a budget, what the assessor is wanting to know is that it is sufficient to do the project, and that you're not asking for too much money. You're not just going to use the money for something else, because you don't actually need all of that money to do this project. So you've got to give them enough detail, and to give them enough detail, ideally you would evidence each budget item. So if your project has a few items in it, so you're going to engage a builder to put down a slab, and then you're going to engage another builder to put up a shed, and then all these different items. Each item should have a quote against it. So either a quote document, or you should explain how you've calculated it. So if it's project management, how have you calculated that? You've assumed that you're going to do 10 hours of project management a week for 12 weeks at a cost of about $50 an hour. That's how you've calculated that amount of project management budget item. So give us some information if you can. That's best practice, of course. Don't forget with your budgets to include the cost of any grant requirements. So sometimes the grant will ask you to do a financial audit, or they might ask you to put up signage. Include anything that they ask you to do as part of your budget, because you have to pay for it, so it needs to be in the budget. The next thing about budget is I'll just talk you through cash versus in kind. So with many, obviously with many grants they're different. Some grants will ask you how much in kind you're providing. Some grants will want you to put that all in the same budget. Some don't care. You just need to look at the guidelines to know what they're looking for. But knowing very clearly what is cash versus what is in kind is a really important thing to doing your grant budget. So I'll quickly run through what that is. If there's a couple of questions to ask yourself. So the first one is the money coming out of my bank account? The second thing is, would I have spent the money even if I wasn't doing the project? These two questions define whether it's cash or in kind. So for something to be a cash contribution, it needs to come out of your bank account, and it needs to be money that you would not have spent if you weren't doing the project. Anything else is an in-kind contribution. If it doesn't meet those two, then it's an in-kind contribution. The best way to explain or give you an example of this is to use staffing. So for example, I'm an organisation and I have a employee. So they're a permanent employee. They work 3 days a week. They always work 3 days a week. Now, while I'm doing this project, I'm going to get them to do the administration, and they're going to not do their other job that they were doing. They're going to stop that, and they're just going to work on this project, and they're going to do all the project admin and reporting and all that sort of stuff. That is not a cash contribution, because if we didn't do the project, I still have to pay this person's salary. They're a permanent employee, 3 days a week. So whether we're doing the project or not, I have to pay their salary. What I am giving to the project is that staff resource. That is an in-kind contribution I am contributing. I'm giving that staff member to the project. But yes, it's coming out of my bank account because I'm paying her out of my bank account. But no, I would have done it. I would have had to pay her anyway, regardless of the project. So therefore, it's not a cash contribution. It's an in-kind contribution. However, let's say we've got the same person. So she works 3 days a week. What I'm going to do during the project is she's going to work full time during the project. So she's going to still keep doing her 3 days a week normal that she was doing before the project, but just for the 6 months of this project, she's going to work full time. So she's going to work an extra 2 days. So those 2 days that she's working extra is a cash contribution, because I would not have paid her for those 2 extra days a week if we weren't doing the project. Does that make sense with everyone? Are there any questions on that before we move on as to cash in kind differences? So with various grants, there will be situations where they say that you need to provide matched funding. So they're only going to provide 50% of the grant and you have to provide the other. Within that, there might be rules that say that all of your contribution has to be cash, or some of it can be cash and some of it can be in kind, or, like only 50% of your contribution can be in kind. All depends on the individual grant program. So you must look at the grant guidelines to know whether your contribution can be made up of in-kind contributions or it has to be all cash, etc. If you're unsure at any time, contact the funding body and ask them. And that relates to leverage funding as well. So if you are going for a grant that requires you to, that won't provide the full project budget, so the grant will only provide 50%, for example, and you're getting funding from somewhere else to cover that 50%, you just need to note that in your budget and make sure it's clear whether you've got that money, whether it's already approved, or whether it's unsure, whether you've applied for money from somewhere else and you're still not certain about that. So is it actually definitely secured or not? With contingency, there's no contingency amount in the, you don't put a contingency in the Aboriginal Ranger Program applications. They do allow for 10% admin costs though, so that covers it a bit there. But for some projects and for some grant programs, you may need to put a contingency in your budget, especially if it's an infrastructure project. If you're building something and you don't have a contingency amount, then the assessor's probably going to look at it and think, that's a concern, there should be a contingency. If you are unsure about whether to put a contingency in your budget or not, ask the funding body. Please don't be afraid. to send an email, pick up the phone, however it is they tell you they want you to contact them, and ask the funding body any questions if you are unsure. If you don't know what they mean by a certain question, ask them. If you don't know what they want from you for a certain question, ask them. Don't hesitate to ask those sorts of questions. So what do I mean by contingency amount? Sorry, Lena, that is a contingency is, okay, look, we've got quotes, we know it's going to cost a certain amount, but there's always things that come up in a budget. You know, so we might need a contingency of 5% or 10% just in case we need more money. So always with building, for example, they'll say, you know, if you get a quote from a building, they'll say, look, it's going to cost you $1 million. And within that $1 million, we've allowed 10% contingency for who knows what, just for things happening. But as I said, that's not relevant for the Aboriginal Ranger Program. Whether it is relevant, you've got to check with each program. All right, so that's the budget. Does anyone have any questions about budget? Because I do know that that can be a difficult one sometimes. No, we're all good. Move on to the next bit. Right, so the next part is just to talk to you a little bit about reporting and acquittal. So this is more once you've got the funding. So obviously you've done a fabulous grant application and you've got the money. What happens then is there will be a funding agreement put in place. Now with the Aboriginal Ranger Program and with some grants, throughout that funding agreement, they will work with you to fill in any holes that might have been there through the grant application. So if you weren't absolutely certain exactly what your timeframes were or exactly how this was going to happen, they'll work with you through that to identify the outputs and the outcomes, etc. But the funding agreement is the document that you fill out that you must comply with. It's usually legally binding, so you must make sure that you comply with it. And so read it really carefully, make sure that you're going to be able to deliver what it says your role is. At that time, when you're going through the funding agreement, the funding body should give you some reporting templates, because as I said, you need to report to the funding body to show that you've spent the money the way you said you were going to and that you've delivered the outcomes that you were aiming to deliver. If you don't deliver exactly on the outcomes, that is okay. You don't need to stress. You just need to explain it usually in your reporting as to why you didn't quite meet the outcomes you were hoping to. This happened and therefore we didn't quite get there. If at the time of doing the funding agreement, before you start your project, if they don't give you a reporting template, ask for one then and there. The reason is you need to know exactly what you're going to have to report on before you start your project, because you need to get a few things set up before you start your project. You might need to make sure you keep records of certain things. You might need to get some data. So you might need to do a survey before the project starts, or you might need to take some photos of some pre-photos, before you start the project. If you get to the end of the project, you finish the project, and then they send you out a final report, an acquittal report document, and in it, it says, please attach before and after photos, and you didn't take any before photos, you can't go back in time and take the before photos. So make sure you find out what you're going to be asked to report on before you start your project. One of the key things that I would recommend is that you set up a separate bank account for your grant funding or for your project funding, or set up a separate cost code within your banking system, because that means then all of the money that's spent on the project comes out of the one bank account or the one cost code. So it's really clear and easy to do your financial reporting. It's really easy to report back to the funding body and say, we spent this amount of money, because it's all come out of the one bank account. It's all really simple if you have a separate bank account. But there are other things you might want to set up. So, you know, there might be, for example, a requirement that you take monthly photos. If you set up your record keeping and you have a folder with project photos and you put them all in that as you go, when you get to the end and you have to do your reporting, it's a really simple process to just grab them all out. You're not having to go through all your emails, etc. So set it up before you start and your future self will thank you very much for it. The terminology, acquittal, just means final report. So it's just a report. It's just reporting on, yes, we spent all the money, this is what we spent it on, and these are the outcomes we delivered. So in summary, to write a really quality grant application, you need to know the funding body's objectives or intended outcomes or aims, whatever they call it, because that is what they are paying for. So you need to make sure you are very clear how your project is going to give them what they're paying for. You need to plan your project. Stop and think, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? Plan your project out before you start writing your application, because it will save you a lot of time. Use those SAO answers and evidence everything. So SAO being situation, action, outcome. And really what I mean by that is just anything that you claim in your grant application, try to provide evidence, either by an example or an attachment. So try to evidence it. So if you claim that your land is, the soil on your land is particularly degraded for some particular reason, there's got to be some evidence for that, whether that's photos, whether it's a report, there's got to be some kind of evidence for that claim. If you claim that by doing your project, you're going to deliver certain benefits, how can you evidence that? Letters of support from people that are going to benefit, those sorts of things. Think about what you can. So go through your application, have a read and go, right, where have I made a claim? Where have I claimed something? And have I given some proof, examples, evidence to back that up? And set up your reporting before you start the project so that you help yourself in the future. Like I said, address all key project questions. Why are we doing this project? Why is it needed? Why this particular location? Why should we be the ones to do it? All of those questions you should address. What are you going to do? Exactly what is your project? When are you going to do your project? How are you going to do it? Who's going to deliver it? Are you going to engage someone? Are you going to do it yourself? What is the cost? What is the budget? Is it viable? Have you spoken to everyone that you need, everyone that's going to benefit? What are the risks? All of that information needs to be included. But before you do that, you must make sure you answer the actual question that is asked. So the boxes in there's a question on the chat. The boxes in the online grant are quite small. Are we okay to provide attachments to all fields, budgets, org charts, etc.? So it just depends on the actual application form. So sometimes there will be word limits to your answers, and often there are word limits to your answers, and therefore you may need to say C attachment A, B, C, whatever it is. Some grant programs, they don't allow you to attach anything. Some, the only thing they allow you to attach is letters of support. You just need to see what you can do within your particular application, what it allows you to do. And that will define what you can do. Usually, if there's really small boxes, they're not allowing attachments, it means that they're not expecting a whole lot of that from you. They just want a summary from you, and they just want to know the basics, because it's a smaller grant or whatever the reason. So that's usually the case if they're not letting you do anything like that. With the grants, don't be afraid to contact the funding body. As I said, I know for the Aboriginal Ranger Program, they've got that email address that Judith mentioned that you need to email to contact them. But don't be afraid to ask questions. If you don't know, if there's a particular question in the application form and you're thinking, I don't know what they want from me, just ask the question. Don't let the application process scare you off putting in for this grant funding, because grant funding can do fabulous things for your organisation. It can be really helpful to get you to do the projects that you need to do. And if you don't put it in, then you don't know. So you can always put in as best you can. And it may be that you don't get the grant, but when you get told, no, you didn't get the grant, always ask for feedback, because then you can learn, okay, look, they've said that we needed to provide more information about these particular things. So then you know for next time, all right, next time we need to actually do a bit more work on that. And there's always people to help around. So if the funding body's not able to help, there are, as you know, as I exist, there are professional grant writing companies that you can ask to help you. Even if you can't afford to have the grant written, we do things like an advisory service where we can review your grant application and give you feedback on it. Or even more simply, a grants help desk where you can just book an hour to have a conversation, to ask a bunch of questions and get your answers that way. So there's always help available. There's also a whole lot on my website. There's a whole lot of blogs and videos that I've done that will provide more information if you are if you wanted more information. So it might be that you're struggling with the why question. Well, there's free on my website in the library section blogs and videos of me talking you all through that to help you to understand how you can do that really well. So don't forget that that exists as well. Does anyone have any questions? No questions at all. Is everyone feeling like they're absolutely fine, no problems whatsoever? They're going to write the absolute best. Oh, hang on, I'm stopping sharing, stop share. There we go, now I can see you. They're going to write the absolute best applications now and they're all good. So I'll just put the website in the chat, but it's whitneyconsulting.com.au and it's in my library. So if you're looking for any blogs or videos, you can go to the library of my website. You can also go, we have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page as well. But I've just put the website details there. Thanks, Leslie. So any questions? Does anyone have any questions about writing grants in general or anything at all? Was it way too much information? Was it way too detailed, not detailed enough? Did you want any clarification on anything? All right, so thank you, Leslie. So we've got a question. Some funding bodies don't specify exactly what they will fund, only what they won't fund. Yeah, yep. So with if you're being asked to provide, they don't specify what they won't fund, I would suggest what they're looking for is a bit of a business case, Adele, a bit of a mini business case. That project plan template I've given you would be perfect for that. You could fill that out and submit that to them. If there's no particular grant program, for example, it might not even be an application form. They might just, they might not be a template that you fill out. That project plan template that I've provided as a handout, fill that out and explain, enter all of those fields, and that will give them all the information that they need to do their due diligence and to make a decision on whether or not to invest in your project. Thanks, everyone. Glad to hear. Yeah, so Carl's saying that advanced grant writing, yep, that's certainly something to maybe feedback to DBCA. Obviously, there's limited you can do online. Advanced would be more of a in-person one where we could get you to work through applications, I would say. Adele, does that answers your question? You're happy with that? Perfect. Any other questions? No, everyone's good. I'm glad to hear that you're more confident. That's good. Very good to hear. Brilliant. All right, well, if there's no more questions, then I will log off and I will wish you luck with your applications, and you know where I am if you need me. Thanks, guys. See you later.